share with you a small bit of my life so that you will understand why becoming a CASA Volunteer 8 years ago is so very important to me. I was born in 1959, and I have an older sister who is almost 7 years older than I am. From the very beginning, we were very close, and given the family dynamics we grew up in, our entire relationship was to protect each other. I was put in her bed at the age of 6 months old, and from that moment on, she and I were connected to each other in a protective sort of way. We never fought like my sisters did because of what we were living through. I adored my big sister, and I followed her everywhere she went. I was 3 when she and I created our own sign language so that she and I had a way to protect each other as much as possible from what was going on in our home. My father, he was the comedian in the family. Often he'd be cracking jokes, which helped keep some normalcy in our home. However, I never knew when this would change. My parents argued often, and there were times that he was volatile, and he was abusive towards my mother, my sister, and myself. My dad beat my mother so often that we had an unspoken routine. When my dad would start beating my mother, my sister would call our grandparents who lived in another city. They in turn would call the police, and they would come to our house. But nothing was done about the physical abuse in our home. See, my dad, he was the choir director, and my mother taught Sunday school at church. And I was taught to never utter a word about what was happening in our home. At the age of 3, my joints began to swell. And by the time I was 5 years old, I couldn't even put my knees together because my joints were so swollen. By the time I was in first grade, the school was becoming increasingly concerned that I was going to get hurt on the playground. They demanded that my parents take me to the doctor and find out what was wrong. The result was that I had JRA, which is juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. However, my parents, they followed what the school wanted. They found out what was wrong, but then they didn't treat it. When I was 15, I broke my hip. It took my parents 3 days to take me to the hospital. By that point, my hip was so twisted that they had to transfer me to a trauma hospital in Dallas, Texas. They put me in manual traction so they could twist my hip back so that it was straight. At that time, I underwent surgery to pin my hip back together. I was told I would never walk again, but I was bound and determined to prove them wrong. Fast forward to today. Due to the lack of medical care growing up, I've had 54 joint replacement surgeries so far, starting at the age of 19. I will continue to have more joints replaced as my joints wear out. My disability made me an easy target for being sexually abused. Statistics show that children with disabilities have a 3.4 chance of being sexually abused than children without disabilities. As difficult as it was to live in the physical pain, it didn't come close to the emotional pain I grew up in. You see, the greatest impact in my life was being sexually abused by my mother. From the time I was an infant until the time I moved out when I was in college. Even today, in 2013, very few people talk about mothers who sexually abuse their children. And still there is little written on it. The taboo about it keeps survivors like myself locked in their own world of pain, afraid that they won't be believed. This is my story of pain, survival, and why I became a CASA volunteer. The sexual abuse by my mother began when I was a baby. My sister remembers coming around the corner in the house, not understanding at the time what was happening to me. At the age of 3, my mother began to molest me with a woman who was a friend of my mother's. That woman was a doctor. Together, this doctor and my mother would sexually abuse me, and at times my mother would drop me off, and the lady would molest me by herself. At the same time as the abuse by my doctor, my mother began forcing laxatives down me to make it easier to sexually abuse me. The result was by the time I was 15, I weighed 50 pounds. That is documented by my school records. At the age of 8, my parents moved to Texas, and in my 8-year-old mind, I'd hoped that moving to Texas would somehow change things. It didn't. Moving became a staple in my life. I went to a total of 14 schools growing up. The longest I lived anywhere was 2 years, and the shortest was 30 days. I think what hurt so much was not that I was bullied, pushed down, kicked, and screamed at by my peers, but my mother would introduce me as, not that this is my daughter, Nancy, but as this is my crippled daughter. No amount of begging or pleading for her to stop this worked. It was humiliating and very shaming to me. To make matters worse, my dad continued to tell me that he had wished I had not been born until I was 13. He didn't like children. Then he would add, besides, you don't really become a person until you turn 18. By the time I was 14, I knew that I wanted to be a social worker. I still did not have the words for what was happening to me, but I knew deep down I did not want other children to experience the hell that I was going through. I read every child abuse book that I could lay my hands on in high school. I already knew what it was like to endure torture, but what I really wanted to know was how to seek help and who should intervene. What I really wanted to know was, why didn't anyone protect me? Why didn't my daddy stop my mom from hurting me? Was I so ugly that I just didn't matter? What I really wanted to know was, what about me? I realized that our teachers are the ones who have the most impact in our daily lives. I work with a lot of teachers today, and still I'm amazed at how many times teachers think that it's not their place to become involved. Every teacher should watch for the signs that I displayed, like sleeping in school, crying nonstop, sucking my thumb, hiding under the school steps, having no friends, just for starters. Even worse, they do not want to imagine that mothers, the one person who is supposed to love, care, and protect, can hurt their children in such a sick, twisted way. A recent survey said that 87% of all children who have been sexually abused by their mothers are not believed when they tell. I am one of those. My parents did not support my decision to go to college and to become a social worker because my sister quit college, so they thought I would too. So they refused to pay. So I worked 2 jobs, babysat in the evenings while still having 5 joint replacements during my 4 years in college. I went on to graduate in 1983 with my bachelor's of social work degree and no student loans. I married my husband, Robert, at 21, and in 2 weeks, we will have been married 32 years. I had 3 miscarriages due to the sexual abuse, and then we had 1 beautiful daughter, Bethany, who is 26 years old and is also a social worker. Robert has been my rock through my journey of surgeries. He's been patient with me while dealing with flashbacks, nightmares, and memories of the past. I have learned to never be surprised at what my doctors find. On my x-rays, my dentist discovered that my jaw had been broken somewhere around the age of 3. Consequently, I now have little bone left, and I have severe TMJ. My orthopedic surgeon discovered 2 different breaks in my arms. So now I have holes in my bones the size of nickels because the RA has eaten through the bone. When we moved to Texas when I was 8, my sister and I had never had immunizations. And we had to stay out of school so we could have all the shots that we needed that we should have already had. No one from the doctors to the school officials asked, Why has an 8 and 15-year-old not had any of their immunizations? I do not want my abuse and my diagnosis of JRA to define me. In 1990, I had to quit my social work position and had to go on disability due to having surgery after surgery after surgery. I wanted to make a positive impact in the life of a child. I first volunteered at child abuse prevention, and I was there for 11 years until they lost their grant money. As I decided to volunteer at CASA. As a CASA volunteer, I have a chance to intervene and change a life of a child. No one tried to intervene or asked, did I need help? In first grade, I was hit in the head by some bullies who was taunting me because I looked differently. My joints were swollen and I could not run. They threw large rocks at me and I had a big gash in my forehead. It was obvious it needed stitches. For about 2 weeks, my teacher would bandage it up, and she kept asking me why hadn't my parents taken me in and get it stitched up. I just kept looking at the floor, tears streaming down my face and not saying a word. Not one teacher intervened when I wet my panties or fell asleep in class. No one stopped the kids at school when they were taunting me, tripping me, and slamming me into walls. I had been taught to never talk about the abuse at all. And all I really wanted was just to be invisible. I was silently, desperately asking for help, but no one was listening. There was no intervention for me, and I have paid a high price for the silence by teachers and families who looked the other way. The abuse impacted my life in every way. I trusted no one as the abuse had destroyed my sense of safety. The abuse greatly impacted my marriage. There were times that my husband looked on helplessly, not knowing what to do during a flashback. Even though I was an adult, during those times, I was reduced to a scared, small child who was very afraid of being hurt yet again. Yet I was able to get the help I needed, and I pushed through the pain that tried to stop me from every turn. There is no way that I can forget the abuse that I went through, because it's ingrained in me, just as the blue eyes that I have. But even if I could forget, I wouldn't. I know the damage that abuse does to a child, and my memories enable me to understand how important it is to intervene as quickly as possible. I heard about CASA 8 years ago, and I knew then that I had found the niche where I felt like I could most impact the life of a child. I believe early intervention means that a child has one day less to endure this pain of abuse. Early intervention means that a child does not have to lose hope for living in a safe and loving home. This is why I became a CASA volunteer. I have worked with 23 children at CASA in 8 years. Hopefully, there will be 23 more adults in the future that will be able to say, Miss Nancy was my friend. Miss Nancy listened to me. And Miss Nancy believed me. All of you here had the chance to change a life of a child so that one day a child can say, I had a CASA volunteer that believed what was happening to me. You have a chance to put a stop to a child being abused. I hope that in hearing my story, you will not see the destruction that I endured, but you will see that after a lot of hard work, I'm not just a sexual abuse survivor, I'm a thriver. I believe that every day that I'm able to intervene in a child's life, it is a day a child is listened to, a day a child is believed, and a day a child can go to bed, sleep soundly, and know he is truly safe. Thank you.